Okay, I call to order the regular meeting of Beaverton City Council. City Recorder, please call the roll.
Thank you, Council President Kimmy. Councilor Duggar?
I'm here.
Councilor Hartmeyer-Prigg? Councilor Hassan?
Here.
Council President Kimmy?
Here.
Councilor Teeter?
Here.
Councilor Tivnon?
Here.
Mayor Beatty? Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. We have a short agenda for tonight's meeting. We'll begin with the consent agenda and move to one work session. After that, we will be adjourned. The first item on the agenda is consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Sure, Council President, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It has been moved by Councilor Hassan and seconded by Councilor Duggar. Is there any discussion? I see none. City Recorder, please take the vote by roll call.
Councilor Duggar?
Yes.
Councilor Hartmeyer-Prigg? No. Councilor Hassan?
Yes.
Council President Kimmy?
Yes.
Councilor Teeter?
Yes.
Councilor Tivnon?
Yes.
Mayor Beatty? Okay, 5 yes, 2 absent.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the work session regarding the Urban Services Framework presentation. We will begin the work session with a presentation by Lee Crabtree, Assistant Director of Community Development. When the presentation is done, each councilor will have the opportunity to comment on the presentation and ask questions of the presenter. Please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Councilor Kimmy. Good evening, councilors. My name is Lee Crabtree, and I am the Assistant Director of Community Development for the City of Beaverton. This evening, members of the Urban Services Framework Project will introduce you to the project and yield time for your conversation. Next slide. As a technical study, this project will result in findings that can be used to help inform future discussions and potential subsequent decisions by elected officials and staff leadership. Your discussion on the questions posed on the slide will help the team understand the type of information you need, questions you have, and will help you inform future discussions and decisions. Next slide. The outline for our presentation this evening includes project team introductions, background information, project goals and approach, including information on technical analysis, case study areas, and urban service scenarios. We will also talk about the timeline and project communications and leave time for your questions and discussion. Next slide. Next slide. This collaborative initiative is led by Washington County's Department of Land Use and Transportation in partnership with the cities of Beaverton and Tigard. The goal of the project is to address the complex challenges of providing urban services to urban unincorporated areas within Washington County. The project's fact-finding mission is led by Echo Northwest, working with JLA, Kimley Horn, and other consultants. Next slide. Next slide. So the provision of urban services is an important issue for Washington County and its cities. Because the availability of urban services impacts livability, it's also an economic development issue. With ongoing changes in the environment, including recent UGB expansions and financial challenges, now is the appropriate time to revisit questions about the provision of urban services, asset conditions, governance, and stable funding for the future. Although this project is a partnership between Washington County and the cities of Beaverton and Tigard, the team expects that the study findings may also apply to urban unincorporated areas adjacent to other cities of Washington County. As a technical exercise, this project will result in findings that can be used to help inform future discussions and potential subsequent decisions. The project will develop background information and findings that can be used to inform future action by leadership and elected officials at the county, cities, and special service districts, If determined appropriate, the findings may be used to update existing agreements or create new agreements, establish new policies around provision of urban services, or direct future study of funding scenarios. The project will result in findings for consideration by elected officials and staff leadership. It's considered a down payment on future work and builds on previous studies. We've done a lot of studies in the county, and the cities have done studies as well. Some of these have examined how services are provided in urban unincorporated areas and have developed the groundwork and background information for this project. Next steps may include moving forward with conversations with the broader community and other jurisdictions, including cities and special districts. Next slide. At this point, I have the pleasure of handing over the presentation to Becky Hewitt and James Kim of Echo Northwest.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, counselors. Yeah. I'm Becky Hewitt. I'm a project director with Echo Northwest. I'll share just a little bit of additional context and then turn it to James to talk a little bit more about our project scope. So when in the context of this project, we're talking about a specific set of urban services. Urban services generally are public services that can be provided by a county, city, or special district that support daily activities in communities. But in the context of this project, we're talking about a specific subset of all the services, public services that those entities could provide. So the ones that are shown here on this slide, those are the ones that we're focused on for purposes of this project. Some of those might be provided also in rural areas, but not necessarily to the same level. Some of them might be kind of more patchy in rural areas. And then there are other services that cities or counties provide besides those listed here. But this is a subset we're going to be focused on. Next slide. So the urban unincorporated area, we are talking about in the map that's shown on the right-hand side, we're talking about the area in blue. What's in green is rural outside the urban growth boundary. What's in brown is in cities, including Beaverton and other cities. And then the blue is that urban unincorporated portion between the urban growth boundary and city limits. If you added up everyone who lives in all of those 115,000 people, which is more than double the population of the city of Beaverton, and accounts for about a third of the county's total residents. Can you go to the next slide, please? So urban unincorporated areas have evolved over decades. Urban levels of development in the county's unincorporated area go back to the 1940s. And that predates the statewide land use system that went into effect in the 1970s. In the 1950s and 60s, a lot of these areas, they were developed with urban services, but in some cases, the developers may have provided those services or formed small utility districts. And so these areas did not necessarily, they weren't required to annex into a city or to incorporate in order to move forward with development as long as those urban services could be provided in some kind of way. Next slide. So today, the county is still responsible for the permitting and planning in the urban unincorporated areas, but it does that work in partnership with the cities. County policy still does not require land within the urban growth boundary to annex to a city before development. Cities generally require annexation if the city is going to extend services, but if the development can proceed without city services, then it can remain unincorporated. The county has seen a lot of growth. And as in cities, the tax revenue has not necessarily kept up with growth due to the limitations imposed by Measures 5 and 50. And that's made it harder for the county to maintain the services that people rely on. The state, at this point, also a lot of new statewide requirements have come out, and they often are asking the county to take on responsibilities similar to what a city would do in terms of land use planning and housing planning. And so that's increasing the pressure on the county in terms of its role with the urban unincorporated areas. Next slide, please. The services in the urban unincorporated areas are provided by a mix of the county and special districts. There are a variety of different special service districts that provide services through a set of intergovernmental agreements. In some cases, the service providers are and the service levels are the same, whether an area is in a city or not. So, for example, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue covers all of the city of Beaverton and much of the urban unincorporated area, and residents in both places get the same level of service from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. And then Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation is similarly covers both the city of Beaverton and many of the unincorporated areas adjacent to the city of Beaverton. But the building inspectors, as a different example, that differs between the county and the city in terms of the number of building inspectors per capita that are available in the different jurisdictions. So sometimes same level of service, sometimes different levels of service. Residents may not know whether they live in a city or in an urban unincorporated area. I know I personally lived in an area that I think may have been Beaverton, but I'm not 100% sure. People often have mailing addresses that show a city name on it that they may or may not live within the boundaries of. And so that can kind of create some confusion about who is supposed to be providing what services. And that can just sort of impact how people feel about where they live and what their expectations are. Next slide. So there are a couple of different types of agreements in place that describe how the county and different other agencies work together within the urban unincorporated areas. One set is the Urban Planning Area Agreements, or UPAAs, if you like acronyms. Those are between the county and a city, and they say how those agencies will plan and permit development, and they're intended to provide some consistency so that if a property owner were to annex, that they would get sort of have comparable set of rules if they were to move into the city. And just to make sure that the two jurisdictions are kind of in alignment about the expectations for the area. They also give planning responsibility for the urban reserves within those areas to a specific city. The urban service agreements address the provision of services. So they can be between the county and any other service provider. The county has agreements with Tigard, Hillsborough, and King City right now. Beaverton's agreement has actually expired at this time. They lay out what the agreements are about who does what in terms of providing services, both now and if boundaries were to change in the future. They don't say anything about when boundaries would change. Both of these types of agreements can be updated when needed, and this study may identify opportunities for updates, but it won't make those updates. It would just identify where updates might be needed depending on what direction the different agencies decide to go. Next slide. So this is a zoomed in map of the urban unincorporated areas and which jurisdiction has an urban planning area agreement in place for each part of that urban unincorporated area. So Beaverton in the middle is in light blue, and then the darker blue area that's immediately around Beaverton is Beaverton's urban planning area. There's also the area in Tigard is another one that this study will focus on. So that's shown in kind of the reddish pink color around Tigard. And you can also see Hillsborough's and the other cities in the urban unincorporated area. And with that, I'm going to turn it to James to talk a little bit more about our project scope and approach, and then I'll come back at the end to talk about our schedule and communication.
Thanks, and thank you everyone for having us this evening. With the background of the urban unincorporators in mind, I want to give you an overview of what the study team is going to do. Next slide, please. And another slide. So with the context of the urban unincorporated areas in mind, the history, the challenges, the Washington County is working with the cities of Beaverton and Tigard on this technical fact-finding mission. This project, because it is technical in exercise, it does not include community engagement as a component. That is not to say that community engagement is not important or shouldn't be part of this, but the study and its findings, we think, can be a basis for future engagement. The study is trying to help you and Tigard and Washington County arrive at a common set of understanding about the available options and impacts. This will, set up a common set of findings that can guide future discussions here among the jurisdictions, and if any, about decisions about future urban services. As listed here in the middle of the slide about the scope of work, we are going to be looking at and documenting the urban services, about where it's provided, who is providing them. We will look at some case study areas, which I will cover in just a bit. And we're going to look at different scenarios of providing the urban services, looking at the costs of providing those services now compared to how they might be provided under a different scenario. Next slide, please. This one is an overview. This slide is an overview of the different steps in the analysis of the exercise. We're going to be answering or asking ourselves questions like, what services are provided? What is the current funding model? Are there any backlogs or unmet community needs? And after evaluating the existing assets around urban services in the urban unincorporated areas, we would look at the financial side of the equation about the costs and potential tax and revenue impacts. We're looking to explore potential solutions that would stabilize funding while delivering urban services at an efficient and an effective way. And in the next 3 slides, I'll go into just a little bit more depth about the 3 items represented here. Next slide, please. So on the existing assets piece of the study, here is a sample list of questions that we are going to be looking into and answering. We want to find out and summarize the current conditions, who is responsible and provides those services, who operates them, who maintains them. And as I said, what are the costs of those services? Are there any one-time costs that we may expect in the short term, or are there ongoing maintenance costs, such as replacing and keeping up with the facilities, the conditions of the facilities? Next slide, please. After looking at the cost side of those existing assets and services, we'd also look at the revenues, and here is a list of taxes and fees that we think we're going to be looking at to understand whether, depending on who is providing services and when and how, whether those scenarios would be financially sustainable over time. Next slide. The third piece of the analysis, the policy and legal considerations. We want to answer questions like, what would it take to implement changes to the service provision? Whether the changes align with existing planning and service agreements, or whether those agreements would need to be updated, and how state land use laws would impact planning and growth under different scenarios. As you see in the last bullet point here, a specific element of this study will be a policy evaluation summarizing the steps required for incorporation of a new city. It is not our assumption that the urban unincorporated areas, the case study areas we're going to be looking at, is suitable for incorporation as a new city, but we do anticipate some interest in learning about this process, learning about these steps, so we will summarize that as part of the work. Next slide. This covers the case studies that we selected in cooperation with the city of Beaverton, with the city of Tigard, of 6 places in the urban unincorporated areas that we could look at to compare the service providers, the service provision, the costs and revenues. For Beaverton, the selected areas are in Bethany, Cedar Hills West, Garden Home, and Raleigh Hills. And these selected places are intended to represent differences in existing conditions, differences in potential implications for fiscal impacts. We'll use the case study areas to produce findings. That's part of the project. But we'll also use those findings to create a framework that could apply to other parts of the urban unincorporated area that are not part of the case studies. Next slide, please. And then here are the urban scenarios, urban service scenarios. The questions we started with are, what would happen to service levels? Could this be a financially sustainable option? And how could this impact residents and businesses? And we want to answer those questions by thinking through 3 categories of scenarios. One is status quo. There wouldn't be changes to the service provider, the boundaries, or the funding sources. What would that mean now? What would that mean down the road? Second category of scenario is boundary changes. This is adjusting who provides the services. Thirdly is an alternative funding. This could be exploring options, new funding tools, new service districts, without changes to the existing service boundaries. Now, I've laid out these 3 categories of scenarios. While we're going to look through and evaluate them, it is possible in the process we discovered that a hybrid of the approaches might be reasonable. And if so, we'll look at that and present findings from those as well. So that was a short overview of the study we're about to journey into. And Becky will present on the communications and the timeline of the project.
Thanks. Can you go to the next slide, please? And one more. There we go. So our next steps. This spring, our team is gathering data, and from now through the fall, we'll be doing the analysis that James just described. And then over the winter period, we'll be synthesizing that, packaging that up, reviewing that with staff, with each of the jurisdictions, to kind of make sure we can clearly articulate what the findings are and be able to communicate in a way that is really clear. And we will bring that then back out to the county and to the 2 cities in the spring and summer of 2026, so roughly a year from now. And then we're looking to finalize a report in summer of 2026. So it's a relatively long interval between now and when we will come back with findings. That's intended to make sure that we can do the technical work and have that kind of all synthesized and vetted before we bring it back out publicly. Can you go to the next slide, please? So because, as has been stated a couple of times, this is a technical exercise. I mentioned kind of why that long interval in between now and bringing information back out. But with that said, staff is available to provide briefings to share progress on this work if that's desirable. And then staff can also provide presentations to community groups, not on the work in progress, but just on the information that we have already been sharing with the elected officials. So if they're curious what this project is about and what's going to be happening, staff can kind of share similar information with them about what's being considered and why. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be a work session planned for summer of 2026 to share the findings. And then from there, depending on where the different elected bodies want to go with it, there could be additional community engagement that might be appropriate, depending on where the findings lead and what the decisions are at that point. So I'm gonna, I think that is it for our presentation. I'm gonna point us to our questions that are in 2 more slides and give you all a chance to ask your questions as well. These are the specific things that we are looking for feedback from all the different elected bodies on, is if there's specific technical information that you really hope that we will bring back to you to help inform decision making. It's really helpful for us to hear that on the front end so we can make sure our work is responsive. And if you have any feedback on the scope that that James laid out, that's also helpful for us to know, because we can still adjust if we need to.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation, and please excuse me joining you a couple minutes late today. I have a question to kick us off about the scope that James was going over. Why would the county commission and pay for you guys to teach unincorporated people how to be their own city when the UUA already lines out where those are supposed to be in the future? Like, we already know areas are supposed to be Beaverton or supposed to be Hillsborough. So why would the county use funds, particularly when Beaverton and Tigard have pitched in, to teach other people how to incorporate? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Becky, do you want me to take a swing at that, or do you?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you would like to go first. Go ahead.
I think there's been interest over the decades of different areas wanting to incorporate, and I think it's from the standpoint of this study and talking about all the options that are available out there, just making sure people are educated and understand what it means to go down the incorporation route. We want to just lay it all out there. I think what people have found in the different neighborhoods, which include Bethany and Aloha, is that it's hard to make it pencil. But we still need to daylight it, as it is a statutory option, whether or not we.
Well, I mean, I get that you have to talk about it. I'm uncomfortable with you guys creating a how-to guide with county taxpayer money to do that. And so I do have an issue with that piece, and I'm one of many here. But I would also say what I'm hoping to look for out of this is, what other governments exist in the UUA, like THPRD. Those are like easy annexation aspects for the city if we're going to continue on this path. So I'd like to know, like, which governments own buildings in the UUA that should be in the city of Beaverton, like parks and schools and firehouses. That information, because the way we have to annex around state law, those coming in make a lot of sense to me. Councilor Duggar.
Hey, thanks. And I would agree with the mayor on that. Like, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. So I don't know if that's helpful to hear that from 2 officials that we're teaching others how to create a city. Let me give you feedback though. As far as the scope, I think I'm looking at for what are the services that are uniquely provided or kind of only can be provided by the county and not the cities, like a clear delineation of those. I think that would be helpful. I think about also like nerdy stuff like water rights, right? Like if we end up with a changing structure and Beaverton gets bigger, do we have the water rights, or are those transferable between jurisdictions so we can serve the various different groups, or is that going to complicate things? And then like the other kind of thing that was crossing my mind really is around economic development and quality of life. Specifically, like best practices and how residents and businesses interact with government to get things done. So if I'm looking to build a project, do I have to go to the county and the city to do things? And if we're looking at the scope of urban services, can we look at those areas where projects have to go to multiple areas and have maybe rethink that and look at like a one-stop shop? Can we really make government more efficient for the folks that are interacting with it, and not just businesses, right? Residents as well. Like are there opportunities with that? And then ultimately, like I don't think I saw this, but are there unique incentive structures that can be as part of this for us to think about, like enticing annexation or stuff like that. Is that, could that be part of the study, or considered as well? Because if this is all not going to happen because people aren't going to vote for it or going to accept it, then we've spent a couple years finding it interesting information, but not necessarily actionable. So I guess there's a piece like, how do we actionize on whatever this ends up being? And that's really all my scope feedback. Thanks.
Councillor Hassan?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. We are up against another meeting, I think. So to answer your questions, I think making sure that this analysis, which I think it will, includes all of the special districts and all the orgs, like I think that will be really critical for us to understand what's happening. To Councillor Duggar's point, it is important to have a delineation of like what the county's doing and what the city's doing. I feel like that's something I think about a lot. And I'm going to bring up police just because it's like the natural one. Like when people call 911, our officers show up, and I'm so thankful for that. And I worry about the duplicativeness of the services that we're having and whether we need to look at combining those efforts. I think the same across a lot of our other districts that are serving us. So my hope when this comes back to us is an understanding of that. And then hopefully I don't know if it'll go as far as recommendations, but just I'm concerned about duplicative services, what duplicative services exist, and whether we're able to get deeper into making sure we're being more thoughtful as to what we're doing as a city and what we're doing as a county. And if you have comments, I'm happy to hear them. If not, that's okay.
I would just also say that on Councillor Hassan's questioning, there is state mandates on like what is a sheriff versus what is a police department, and so that would be helpful information for the city council to understand that sheriffs are elected and operate differently under state statute in unincorporated areas. They don't operate within city jurisdictional boundaries, so that would be helpful for the council to understand a little bit more as well. Councillor Teeter?
Yeah, thank you for coming to share all this with us. I am very interested in this, and this seems like a very comprehensive approach for this very big topic. I'm really excited about the financial analysis of all of this. Oftentimes when we have annexations, I'm wondering what's the cost of service for this property coming in, and what's the overall revenue coming in as a result, and does it balance out overall? And we don't always know all of those numbers. So I think this will really help on a broader neighborhood scale. I want to echo the mayor and Councillor Duggar shared about being uncomfortable with how-to guide of how to create a city in some unincorporated areas when they're part of our urban service area, future area agreements. I feel like we could use a guide for how to support a transition and annexations. Because the reality is, if we bring somebody in Cedar Hills into the city, their property tax rates might go up pretty substantially. And that would be a really heavy, hard sell for any local leaders who are advocating for this, or for local residents who are trying to get their neighbors to join in. So if there's advice for cities about how they can help be part of this transition and can make it, similar to what Councillor Duggar said, make it a little bit more enticing and appealing for people to make that jump to join the city. So I think we got 4 tools available through the state law that we can use to annex properties into the city. So just some guidance would help, so that we're not waiting decades for this to actually take place. We can kind of phase it in a little more quickly than that. But I'm really excited about this overall.
I would also say to Councillor Teeter's point, as someone that was around when we did the financial audit of Aloha and Bethany before, the substantial jump in property tax was largely to do with the fact that the county wasn't levying the highest rate, and they are now. And so it is much closer to what they're like. It's not that substantial as it was a decade ago. So some comparisons among houses of like size would be helpful for us as we're looking through this. Obviously we can't compare a 1,200 square foot house with, a 3,000 square foot house in Murray Hill. So like apples to apples is important too. Councillor Tivnon?
Thank you. I'm excited for this as well. Echoing what Councilor Teeter said, it just brings up all sorts of questions for me. And observations. The fact that we are basing so much about how we get money, revenues, taxes for the operations and planning out of our cities on two measures from the 90s, one of which is like 28 years old, the other I think is 35 years old, is insanity to me. And I really hope that our state legislators will take this on and maybe do a study similar in nature to this to get their heads wrapped around what we're really trying to do here. To me, city and county, in a perfect world, county is more rural and handling things outside the urban framework, and city is for the urban areas. So I like the idea of seeing that map you showed us eventually just be those cities and the unincorporated be gone. I'll just go out on a limb and say that. So if there are elements of this study that help us get to a place where we figure out how to do that, that'd be great. I have a feeling that a lot has changed at state level to really make that feasible. I also, to that point about, is this going to be a document that is just really interesting and insightful, or are there going to be recommendations in it? I really hope there are recommendations, things for us to really chew on and move this kind of work forward, because it seems like there's going to be a whole lot of insight that could be gathered from this type of research, and very excited to see what comes of it. The last thing is a question is, are there other studies like this that have been done? I know Oregon rolls a little weird and differently than a lot of other states. So are there any other studies that have been done like this in Oregon or elsewhere that might be good reference material to kind of prepare ourselves for when we have this one ready for review?
Was that a question you wanted?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think she did.
Did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
as a staff, we did a technical study in 2018 to try and understand level of service, cost of service, status of assets. But it was just a light city study. I shouldn't say light, it was a study. But it doesn't lead to any necessary action by council. I think we'd have to look and maybe rely on some of the research of our consultants to find out if there's something similar someplace else. I'm also going to take this moment, since I've got the mic, to say this study isn't jumping or looking into annexation as an anything in here. It's to, really just getting you financial information in the county and Tigard financial information in order to think through, like, what's the status of our assets? When do they need to be maintained and replaced, and what's the cost of that? Who should do, there are people doing that now, organizations doing that now. How much does it cost for them to do that? Is there funding available for that? And if the funding is falling short and we're not meeting the expectations that people have for us for providing services, then how are we going to find another path to funding that? And
absolutely. I do see, you're hearing it from the council. This is on our minds.
Yeah.
And I can see this as being a document that ends up providing a lot of insights, almost like pro forma in some ways, of thinking through where are the true needs, who's in the best position to service them, where are the efficiencies. And it's just the reason why I asked if there's other frameworks or plans that have been done like this out there is it seems highly unique. Like we might be breaking some new ground in some ways with this, just because of the unique set of circumstances of the way things roll here in Oregon and the way things have developed out here on the west side in Washington County. So it's just more clarity and insight on that, to just understand how we can harness this report in the best ways possible. And maybe it's because I'm feeling really cheap right now and hoping that every single thing that the city's involved in, we can double down on maximizing what we can get out of it. And it's probably just because we're about to head into budget. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Kimmy.
Yeah, I think Lee and the conversation between Lee and then Councilor Tiflon pretty much answered my questions, but I do want to ask if the study comes out that we know exactly what we're getting, where it's not just a bunch of information, but it's somewhat of concrete actionable items should be there, concrete recommendations maybe, so that we are just not digesting information and trying to come up with some kind of answer, but there's somewhat of a clear pathway, or at least somewhat of an optional pathway that we can get into, so we can take actually concrete action, like annexing a property or the neighborhood, how much it will really cost us, what is the fee for maintenance, and revenue sources, if we're gonna do any kind of changes to our agreement or service providing. So I just hope, since it's not just a bunch of information, but actually somewhat of information that we can act on.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. You know, we'd like to be kept abreast of how things are moving through. This is something, I mean, the entire 12 years I've been at the city, we've been talking about annexation and what that means, because there's a lot of uncertainty for people. And I'll tell you, everyone thinks they live in the city, and everyone calls us. And, you know, in fairness, any door in government you walk through is the right one. But we do a lot of work for the unincorporated as it exists now, between our library and our events and our staffing and all the things. So we're interested in the outcomes. You heard a lot of comments from my counselors tonight on particular areas that they're interested in, but the through line through everyone's comments has been, is it feasible? Can we financially do it? And, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? So that would be my summation of everyone's questions this evening. So thank you for joining us. We are going to adjourn tonight's meeting and join the Bureau Council link after this. So anything from you guys that you need from us before I adjourn? Lee, you're good?
All good, thank you. Megan jumped on video, so I don't know if that means anything. Okay.
All right, I'll see everyone on the Bureau link.
Thank you.